Demons concerns the passing down of political opinions from one generation to the next. The generation on the rise, the young generation in the book, are somewhat diverse in their political opinions. The newest thing among the young, however, is a new thing in politics. And it is what the novel concerns on one very deep level. For shorthand, I will call this generation the young. What distinguishes the young, however, is their attraction to revolutionary nihilism. The leading member of this younger generation is not introduced until near the end of part 1. Pyotr Stepanovich enters our story in the 5th chapter of part 5. He's about 27 years old or thereabouts. He's university educated. He has no real sense of filial piety. He knows how to act the part of the revolutionary. He lies when necessary. He plays to people's vanity. He plays to their political interests. One could go through a checklist of Sergei Nechayev's Catechism of a Revolutionary and see that Pyotr Stepanovich does it all. He will lead the assassination later in the novel. Other youth are attracted to this revolutionary vision, but Pyotr is the straw that stirs the revolutionary drink. The generation of the young is raised by the previous generation. I will be calling this previous generation the liberals. Not all of the previous generation are liberals, but these liberals spawned the young, the revolutionary nihilists. These liberals sympathize with the aim of revolutionary reform. They see their political aims in revolutionary nihilism, but they don't go as far. The liberals differ among themselves about why they don't go as far. Some of the liberals are just naive, thinking that the young revolutionaries can be made responsible through mentoring or better education. These young are just liberals in a hurry, they think, and the young must be made to go slower. Some are craven, cowardly, and vain, seeking to be included among the young without embracing their nihilism. Others are genuinely skeptical of revolutionary nihilism or become skeptical, but because they think it undermines the conditions for a good society. These liberals are perhaps a bit romantic, and Stepan Trofimovich, the leading liberal of the last variety, is certainly a species of romantic liberal. The book is set in 1869 or so. Stepan Trofimovich, our leading romantic liberal in the book, had been a student in the 1840s. His name, we learn in the first section of part 1, was almost on par with the great liberals of his age, Belinsky and Herzen. He preached the French radical George Sand among Petersburg students. He was part of a secret society who was intending to translate the great radical French thinker Fourier. He was on the cutting edge of society's evolution in the 1840s. He appears an exalted figure with great ambitions and high-minded aspirations. Still, Stepan is not a doer. He thinks a lot of himself, of his own high-mindedness, but he's never really done anything. He considers himself a political exile, and he likes to think he is under surveillance. But no one has ever surveilled him. No one pays him any mind. Our narrator says of Stepan, Stepan Trofimovich was a most intelligent and gifted man, even, so to say, a man of science. Well, in fact, he had not done such great things in science. I believe, indeed, he had done nothing at all. But that's often the case with men of science among us in Russia. Stepan is a writer, but he never publishes anything or finishes anything. His character is exalted in its ambitions, but deflated in his execution. It is pretty funny how his posturing and his performance are on two very different levels. By the 1860s, Stepan worries that the political world has passed him by. He is stuck in his one-horse town. He and his patroness Varvara try to stay relevant in the late 1850s. This is an important and illustrative episode told in part 1, chapter 1, instead of an introduction, sections 6 and 7. Stepan and Varvara have heard about new ideas. Varvara is especially attracted to those new ideas. Stepan was scornful of the general movement in the highest sense, but it seems that he was scornful mostly because he'd been forgotten and no one needed him. He and Varvara decide to go to Petersburg, where they will join the movement and he will show his powers. Varvara and Stepan meet young revolutionaries in Petersburg. The revolutionaries were at first very gentle and respectful to the couple. After the couple demonstrated their commitment, however, the revolutionaries seemed to consider it their duty to look upon them with contempt and unconcealed derision. Varvara sought to be respected, but she was told to just sit there and listen. Same with Stepan. The revolutionaries explain their ambitions. Their ambitions are worth quoting at length. They talked about the abolition of censorship, about spelling reform, about replacing Russian letters with Roman. About someone's exile, they talked about the abolition of censorship, about spelling reform, about replacing Russian letters with Roman, about the advantages of dividing Russia into free federation of nationalities, about abolishing the army and navy, about restoring Poland up to the Dnieper, about peasant reform and tracts, about the abolition of inheritance, about family, children, and priests, about women's rights. This gives us the first flavor of what the revolutionaries aimed at. They wanted a new Russia. Imagine no country, no war, no family. It's easy if you try. While in Petersburg, this group met with an old faithful general, Ivan Ivanovich. This general represents a third category, not much present in the book, who is neither liberal nor young. The general stands up to this group and calls them brats and atheists, and speaks of his pride in having served the Tsar. A scandal happens as the result of the general's speech. The revolutionaries blame Varvara for not throwing him out on his ear immediately. Stepan rises to her defense, kind of. He generally agrees, he says, with the revolutionaries in finding the idea of fatherland useless and comical, and in recognizing the harmfulness of religion. But Stepan refuses to see the whole of the Russian past as useless. He thinks they are single-mindedly politicizing human life, and this would undermine the great goods, such as poetry and other forms of beauty. Notice here that Stepan does not join in their critique of the family and all that part. The revolutionaries boo and hiss at Stepan's speech. The next day, the revolutionaries come to visit Varvara and Stepan as they plan to leave Petersburg. Varvara was planning on establishing a journal to help promote their new ideas. She and Stepan would help shepherd that journal. 5 revolutionaries show up and announce to Varvara that after founding the magazine, she should at once turn it over to them along with the capital under the rights of a free cooperative. And she herself should leave for home and not forget to take Stepan Trofimovich. So the revolutionaries will live off the capital of these old liberals, but the old liberals will have no authority over them. And our 2 liberals slink back to their hometown with their tails between their legs, apparently acquiescing in the revolutionaries' demands. This is not the last time the liberals will back down from a confrontation with the young revolutionary nihilists. And we can see why such liberals seem a bit out of their depth when confronted with these determined revolutionaries. We could almost make a list. Liberals agree with the revolutionaries that religion is a harmful institution. It keeps people from loving freedom. Liberals agree with the revolutionaries that all is not well in Russia. The liberals, like the revolutionaries, want to see the serfs emancipated. Liberals agree with the revolutionaries that patriotism should not be a sentiment and that no one should be nostalgic about their fatherland. Neither of our liberals here, Stepan or Varvara, have been model parents, and their actions seem to match their policy of abolishing the family. Stepan does not have the strength to act in the world, though, either. For all of that, we can also recognize the ways that Stepan opposes the revolutionaries. He insists on a distinction between the high and the low. He respects learning. He respects beautiful poetry. He looks to the past and can find things to appreciate, noble things. Russia's past is not all serfdom, but it also has knights and Pushkin. Stepan is the only character in the book that keeps talking in French. And this annoying intrusion into the book tells us something important about him. He respects the high, and he does not think that the high can be found only in one country. One more crucial thing about Stepan. He recognizes his own weakness. He is aware that he does not uphold the high ideals for which he has stood. This means, I would say, and this is crucial, that he is always open to redemption in the book. His genuine commitment to these high ideals can be a basis for action. He has mooched off Varvara for years, but he sees his mooching as a weakness. He has stood for the high, but he hasn't acted for it. Maybe he will when the time comes. Other liberals in the book do not have this basis for opposing the revolutionary nihilism of the youth. So we have begun to sketch the difference between the revolutionary youth and the older liberals of the 40s. We need to talk a bit more about the relation between these groups before we do a character sketch or two of other important characters.